In this episode, we are going to discuss the judicial sources of tax law. Courts make up a whole bunch of law based off of what the code says, based off of what the administrative sources, such as the IRS and the Treasury Department say, and we talked about those in prior episodes. And now we're going to talk about what the courts say. They are making decisions based off the facts. In a lot of cases, there are going to be sets of rules, but there's gray area. How do specific sets of facts actually play into how a particular case and how the law is supposed to be interpreted? So with that, let's get started. It's important to know that what we are going to be talking about are federal cases. But the law is actually broken up into two different segments. You've got the federal circuits, and you've got the federal law, and you have state law and state districts. And so when we are talking, we are only going to be talking about the federal law and how federal courts are to be determined. When we are talking about taking a tax case to court, there is the district court. It then goes to an appellate court, and then it goes to the Supreme Court. The 5 different courts with jurisdiction to hear tax cases are the U.S. Tax Court, the U.S. Court of Federal Claims, U.S. District Courts, and then it goes to the appeals, which are the U.S. Circuit Courts of Appeals, and then the U.S. Supreme Court. Jurisdiction. So what it means for a court to be able to hear it is whether or not they have jurisdiction. To simplify it, jurisdiction is the power and authority to constitutionally conferred upon that court or judge to pronounce a sentence of the law or award a remedy provided by the law. So the federal judicial system is broken up into trial courts and appeals courts. A trial court are the federal district courts. Then there is the U.S. Court of Federal Claims, the U.S. Tax Court, and within the tax court, there is the small cases division of the tax court, the U.S. Tax Court, which is limited to amounts of $50,000 or less. If you take your case to the small claims division of the U.S. Tax Court, there is no appeal. It just stops right there. Next are appeals. So if you don't like the decision that you got at the district court, you can then appeal to a higher court to get a different answer. The higher court can either overturn the decision of the district court, can remand the case back to the lower court to identify specific issues or get additional facts, or it sustains the holding of the lower court, saying that the lower court, the district court, got it correctly. How do courts actually make determinations? Well, they're governed by stare decisis, Latin term. Essentially, it just means that each case, except in the small claims division, has precedential value. That means that future cases that have a similar set of facts are controlled by the cases that were brought at an earlier time. So what is a case? A case has 5 parts. It has facts. So it will list out the facts of the case. You have to know the facts of the case to determine what the issues are going to be and how those issues are related to the law or the rules that are in effect at that time. Then there is an analysis of how those facts are related to the law, and at which point the judge will then conclude or hold as to how the case should be decided. This is frequently referred to as the FIRAC method because the structure of a case is facts, issues, rule, analysis, and conclusion, or FIRAC. The parties of a case are different depending on if it's a civil case or it's a criminal case. Anything not criminal oriented is a civil case. Civil cases, you refer to the parties as the petitioner, or the person who actually starts the case or petitions the court to rule on a case, and the respondent, or the person who is responding to that petition. If it is a criminal case, it's the plaintiff, or the person who is complaining of a particular wrong that has been done to them, and the defendant, the person who is defending their case, saying that they have done nothing wrong. A lot of times that these terms are used interchangeably in different types of cases, but for the most part, you're dealing with either civil, petitioners and respondents, or criminal, plaintiffs and defendants. Okay, so in the trial courts, there are differences in whether or not you would want to choose a particular trial court over another one. So for the federal district court, there are lots of district courts, and depending on the size of your state, you're going to have anywhere from 1 to 10 different district courts. Those courts oversee a geographic area, and typically there is one judge that hears the case, but in a particular district there can be many judges that hear lots of different cases that happen in that courthouse. The location of that district court is dependent on that geographic area. And the jurisdiction that they have is that they can hear all federal law cases, and any case that is requested at the state level to be heard at a federal level. So the types of federal law that they can hear are tax, of course, then criminal, telecommunications, railroad cases, antitrust, which is dealing with monopolies, trademarks, foreign relations, as well as military cases. And then there are a lot of other different areas of law as well. You can request a trial by a jury of your peers, as well as just have a judge look over your case and just make a determination based off of what they see. Juries are only allowed to answer questions of fact, not law. Typically for tax cases, juries are not requested, just because a lot of tax cases are issues of law, not necessarily issues of fact. Also, they're very complicated, and most juries are not going to be able to understand what is going on in a particular case. Additionally, so then the question becomes whether or not you have to pay that deficiency before the case is completed and a decision has been made, or once that decision has been made. And for a U.S. District Court, you have to pay beforehand and then sue for a refund. There's no such thing as termination of running of interest at the District Court. You appeal then to the U.S. Appeals Court in the circuit in which the taxpayer lives. So, for example, Utah has its own district court. It covers the entire state, and the district then appeals to the 10th Circuit that also covers Colorado and Wyoming and a couple other states. So now let's go on to the U.S. Court of Federal Claims. There is only one court that governs the entire United States, and it is made up of 16 judges. Most federal claims cases are heard in Washington, D.C., but it does sometimes travel. Its jurisdiction covers claims against the United States based upon the Constitution, acts of Congress, or any regulation of an executive department. They hear non-tax cases as well as tax cases, and they're pro-business. So here, if you have a business tax case, corporations, partnership, etc., this is a great place to go because they're going to be pro-business. It's not a great place to hear a lot of technical issues that are in that particular tax case. You'll want to go someplace else. Here also, if there is a lot of discovery or the time period in which you have to identify the evidence or figure out where the evidence is, then this is a great place as well. You are not allowed a jury of your peers. You only are heard by the particular judge that is over your case. you have to pay the tax that is identified by the IRS that you owe, and then you sue for refund and interest. There is no such thing as termination of running of interest at this court, and you appeal to the Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit. The next court we're going to be talking about is the United States Tax Court. There is only one United States Tax Court, and it is comprised of 19 judges. You will either be heard by all 19 or one. These judges are typically former IRS or Treasury Department workers and are typically appointed from those positions. They're officially located in Washington, D.C., but they do travel. But there is a delay if they have to travel to your particular state. Their jurisdiction is that they only hear tax cases. They will not hear any other type of case. There is no such thing as a jury trial. Only the judges will hear it. Here, though, you do not have to pay the tax until after the case has been decided. Additionally, there is interest that accrues, but you only have to pay that interest if you have not won the case. And here, there is termination of running of interest. You must procure a cash bond, which may be deposited to stop interest from running. If you do procure a bond, you have to also deposit the tax that is assessed against you and any accrued interest. However, there is no interest on the deposit if you win as the taxpayer. And then you appeal to the United States Appeals Court in the circuit in which the taxpayer resides. Okay, additionally, there are some tax cases that are heard in bankruptcy court. Now, you don't go to bankruptcy court to have a tax case heard, but IRS and other creditors are prevented from taking any action against the taxpayer while in bankruptcy court. And so the bankruptcy court, if you have filed for bankruptcy, may settle a particular tax claim while they are hearing your bankruptcy case. So these are the different types of trial courts. Let's say now you didn't like how your particular case came down. The judge did not go in favor of you and of your facts. And so you can appeal your case to the appellate courts. The appellate court then reviews the trial record. They make a determination as to whether or not the trial court applied the proper law in arriving at the decision. The appeals court is bound by findings of fact, so whatever facts were presented by the trial court, they're bound by those facts, unless the facts are clearly erroneous. This is governed by Federal Rule of Civil Procedure 52A. If the findings of fact are found to be clearly erroneous, they will then overrule the case and have it retried. So what are the different outcomes for a case? The outcomes can be over the entire holding, all of the case holdings or decisions of the court, or regarding specific issues and the specific holdings over those. So they can actually break up a case and determine whether or not they're going to overrule, affirm, or remand. For some appellate courts, there are going to be more judges than one. They can be 3, they can be more, and for the United States Supreme Court, there are 9. If there is more than one judge, then all of the judges will either concur if a judge agrees, dissent if a judge disagrees with the majority opinion. The judges who all decide that they either agree with a particular holding or they disagree with how the case came down, they will make the controlling opinion. And that will be then the law of the land. That governs all cases that come before it that have similar sets of facts and similar sets of issues regarding those particular laws. All right, so this then brings up the idea of precedent, or a history of law in a jurisdiction. District courts are governed by precedent set by the Court of Appeals for that jurisdiction. they're also governed by the precedent of their own court unless they decide to change it. Now, appeals courts are also bound by the court above them or by the decisions that they have made unless they decide to change it. Everybody needs to follow the law of the United States Supreme Court unless that law or that case is then overturned by the Supreme Court at another time. So now let's talk about the tax court, because they're a very unique court because they are a national court. What is their precedent? So a taxpayer is located in Wyoming, and Wyoming has specific laws that govern that particular circuit, but since they're a national court, they could also hear all of the other cases and apply the precedent from other circuits to a particular case in Wyoming. Well, in a case called Golson, they made the determination that the law should be applied only if the Court of Appeals of that jurisdiction, or that governs Wyoming, for that example, has not passed on an issue or similar case. So precedent from other circuits can be applied only if that particular circuit covering Wyoming has not already ruled on that particular issue. All right, lastly, let's say you don't like what happened in your circuit court of appeals. You then can prepare a writ of certiorari to request that the United States Supreme Court hear your case and make a decision. The United States Supreme Court will then grant that writ and hear the case. The court will only grant a writ if 4 out of the 9 justices believe that the issue is sufficient to hear. They only have so many cases that they can hear on their calendar, and so they will deny a writ or they'll grant a writ depending on whether or not it's a case that they feel is really necessary for precedent and for the continuation of law. Rarely does the United States Supreme Court grant a writ on tax cases. I don't know why. It could be that they don't want to hear tax cases. So then, lastly, I just want to provide you with some areas that you can go to research judicial law. There are some commercial tax services. They are listed here. I personally prefer to use CCH and Teleconnect, as well as the BNA Portfolios and Thomas Reuter's Checkpoint. But these are really good places, and if you aren't able to purchase some of these software programs, because some of them are very expensive, like Westlaw or LexisNexis, these are definitely used by lawyers and can charge per click. They can charge by the hour, and they can charge a very large amount based off of just an unlimited ability to use their services. There are some non-commercial tax services listed below. The IRS publications are great. They provide you with a general idea of what the tax law is going to be. law.cornell.edu is something that I go to frequently. And judicia.com is where you can actually find the cases just as they are spelled out, but it doesn't provide you with some of the additional benefits that these commercial tax services can provide, like analyzing whether or not that case is still good law or has been overturned in subsequent cases, etc. But anyways, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this episode, please give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions, leave comments below. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. And also, please subscribe. Definitely want to provide you with up-to-date tax information, as well as additional episodes that we will be having on individual income tax. Thank you so much for watching, and we hope to see you next time.